Good morning, everybody. And thanks to everyone for joining us for today's webinar on the ownership links for EU transaction log accounts. Before I launch into the presentation, I'd like to give you an outline of the talk today. First, I will motivate the project and provide you with the key objectives of this database project. Then I will speak about how we actually realize this and what the concrete outcomes of the project are. And I will conclude with an outlook. Now, before going on, let me ask you, in your opinion, how many firms approximately are covered by the EU ETS? I see people are voting. Interesting pattern, I have to say. Let's give you a few more seconds for those of you who haven't made up their mind yet. All right. That is interesting. Okay, so let me close the poll and share the results with you. So what you can see here is that people have a pretty wide, there's a pretty wide distribution of what people think in terms of the number of firms. And except for the first option, which people don't think of very much. In fact, the majority of people believe there are 13,000 firms covered by the EU ETS. In fact, these are the installations. So an installation is a plant, essentially. So it can be a power plant or a plant that produces something else that is regulated under the EU ETS, for instance, a steel mill or a paper factory. And then we have two other options, 3,000, 5,000, with a more or less roughly even distribution between those, with a stronger reference for 3,000. In fact, these are the two, in quotation marks, correct answers. So depending on your idea what a firm is, you're going to get either 3,000 roughly, so it's a bit more than 3,000, or about 5,000 companies. So our idea of what a firm is, and I will explain more what that means, leads to a number of about 3,000 firms that are regulated under the EU ETS. So let me launch into the presentation. So the EUTL, the EU transaction log data, is roughly speaking based on installations. So as I said before, these are plants, power plants, factories. There are other accounts for people who want to trade but don't have an installation. But roughly speaking, this is how the system is run. However, the economics of the EU ETS are determined by firms. So it is important to know about the connection between these installations, or more generally speaking, accounts, and the level of the firms. So let me give you a simple example. So suppose now we have 3 installations. The A stands for allocation and the E stands for emissions. Suppose now, as an example, consider the factory on the left, the installation on the left. It has an allocation of 15 EU allowances. These are permits that can be traded in the EU ETS, and emissions of 10 tons. Each EUA is good for 1 ton of emissions. So what we see from this picture is that the 2 installations on the left have more allowances than they have emissions, and the one on the right has less allowances than it has emissions. So this is an example of what we call the EUTL compliance data. These data are published very soon after the end of every trading year. And now, suppose we observe some flows of permits between these three installations. Okay, so now once you adjust for these flows, you can see that the two installations on top are fine. They have exactly the same number of allowances and emissions, and the one at the bottom in fact still has a surplus of 5 EUAs. It can, if it doesn't have any other outflows, it can keep these installations. We call this banking. It can keep these permits. We call this banking. So now the question is, in terms of the economics behind this, well, are these three installations all controlled by the same parent company? So this would be our case one. Or could it be that the top two installations are controlled by one company, whereas the bottom one is controlled by another company? Or is it that all three installations are independent? Well, you may wonder, what difference does this make? Well, let's do the numbers. So in this table, I have color-coded the three cases from the previous slide. And you can see on top, the first case where we have one firm, we can sum up the allocation and emissions across the associated installations. And we see some information, we can collect the information on transfers and banking. So what we see here is that our transfers, both transfers in the first case happen within the same company. So we sum them up, we have internal transfers in the amount of 10 EUAs total. We have no sales or purchases to other companies, and we have a banking of 5 for the company as a whole. Now in the second case, one of these transfers is still internal, but as you can see now, the other one is coded in your data set as external. So we have sales of 5 from one company, which correspond to purchases of 5 by the other company, and we have internal transfers of 5, and still banking of 5. Now, if we assume that all three companies are independent, then we have no longer any internal transfers, and everything is transferred between companies. So what this little example shows you is that a different definition of a firm yields a different data set. And as you can imagine, the more you grow the number of accounts, the larger this impact becomes. So suppose you have 50 installations, and on one extreme you assume that they're all independent, and on the other extreme you assume that they are all controlled by the same company, you're obviously going to have a larger impact the more of these accounts you aggregate. And generally speaking, as we have seen here, for instance, in case 3, the smaller the companies, the more your data show that we conduct intercompany trade, that the companies in the EU ETS conduct intercompany trade. Okay, so you may wonder, well, okay, fair enough, but how important is this really regarding real data? How relevant is this issue? Well, to consider this, let me launch the second poll, and let me ask you, what do you think is the largest number of EU ETS accounts that is controlled by a single firm? So one firm only, how many accounts does it control? Is it 10 or 50 or 100 or even 200? Okay, the votes are coming in. That is very nice. Very nice. Pretty even distribution so far, except for one option. Okay, let me give you just a few more seconds. Okay, thank you very much. So let me share the results with you. So what you see is people have voted pretty evenly for options 1, 2, and 4. And we have a stronger weight on option 3. So the majority of you believes that the largest company controls about 100 accounts. In fact, it's slightly more than 200 accounts. So you can see that this can be quite, this is quite relevant in reality. And here you see an illustration of the company that controls the largest number of EU ETS installation accounts. So we have E.ON, which is a German electricity generator. It ultimately controls 207 EU ETS installations according to our data set via 46 operators. And here, this is where this distinction between your idea of what a firm is becomes a bit more visible. An operator is a firm that is registered with national authorities on a national level and is responsible to the EU ETS administration for a certain number of accounts. It can be one account, it can be several accounts. However, and some people may take an operator to be the firm and may conduct their empirical analysis on operators, which is fair enough. However, as we can see in this very simplified picture, we have E.ON's headquarters here, and we have all these different operators. So this just shows you some of those 46 with some of the names, and then in turn, these operators control individual accounts. So the EUTL has some information on this connection here, and this connection here, and this connection here. But what this project does is it makes visible the lines that I have colored in red here. So it makes visible the connections between these operators. So you may wonder, well, fair enough, but why should I really care about this, economically speaking? Is it not enough to look at these operators or individual installations, or just aggregate everything to the country level? And to that I would respond that fair enough. That is very valid, and I believe you can do a lot of valid analysis. But as I mentioned in the beginning, firms are the economic actors in the EU ETS. Firms decide about abatement. Firms decide about emissions, and firms decide about trading. So they may delegate to, for instance, the level of installations or to the level of operators. But there is still a decision in the background. So even if everything is decentralized, then implicitly the headquarters has decided not to centralize this management of the EUA portfolio. So essentially, no matter whether the action is centralized at the group level or not, this may provide some knowing about the group level. The connection between the accounts and the group level may provide some important information about the economics of the EU ETS. For instance, your data, you may be able to code correctly whether your permit trade data shows an internal or an external trade. An example could be, suppose you have your data on the level of operators or account holders, and you observe some transfers between operators in two different registries, so in two different countries. If you keep your data on the operator level, this will tell you that you have a trade between two different companies. However, for a small number of companies, the multinationals, they may actually control both operators on both sides of the trade. So knowing what multinational controls these operators can provide useful information about the economics. I would like to point out that this is really relevant only for a relatively small number of companies. So the multinationals or large national companies. However, the EU ETS is relatively concentrated in terms of emissions. You have about 100 companies that control about 75% of emissions in the EU ETS. So doing this exercise can make a difference in terms of what your data tells you at the end. So something that you may learn about from doing it at the firm level could be something about the distribution of abatement costs, or for instance, the role of financial intermediaries in the permit trade. So given all these observations, I'm getting to the primary objectives of our project. The primary objective is to make EU ETS transaction data, so the data that measures the flows between these different accounts, suitable for firm-level empirical analysis. We try to allow for some use of the more recent compliance data as well. I can tell you more about this in the Q&A session if you're interested. However, the focus is on transaction data. And as you have probably got a sense by now, it's not so easy to do this kind of mapping. It takes a while, it takes some resources, it takes access to some data, as you will see in a moment. So it's not so convenient, which may discourage people who might be interested in doing research on the EU ETS. But if they are required to do this kind of work before they actually start doing any kind of research, they may end up not doing the research at all. So we have decided to make this a publicly available reference data set to avoid this type of duplication of effort by anybody who is interested in doing anything on the EU ETS. Okay, so now let me tell you who contributed to this. The project took place under the overall guidance by Danny Allerman, who is the director of CPRU, and we have been 5 contributors. Other than myself, these are Jurate and Andrius from Umeå University, Thijs from the University of Groningen, and Alex from the University of Graz. And I have to mention that this project would have been impossible without support by the European Commission, specifically DG Climate Action and Bureau van Dijk, which is a commercial provider of firm-level data. You will see in a second why this is crucial. So essentially, Bureau van Dijk allowed us to construct the matching based on their data and publish the results. Okay. So let me sketch out the approach that we took to construct the matching. So what we did is we took data, we took information on the current holders of EU ETS accounts, which you can get from the EUTL. And the goal was to link these holders to historical parent companies. So we did that by means of ownership data from Bureau van Dijk's Orbis database. However, we couldn't do it directly because this link is not directly available in Orbis. However, it is possible to construct an algorithm that will give us this information in the end. So I will sketch a rough outline of this algorithm right now. So this is the algorithm for the cases where we have information on historical shareholders available in Orbis. This is not the case for every account holder. However, it is the case for the big majority. So now suppose we take the current account holder, we assign an ID number that allows us to link to the information about that company in Orbis. We then check if there is another company that has a historical ownership share. Historical here means for the years 2005, 6, and 7, individually, for each year. We check if there is a historical owner that has a majority of this company. If we cannot find a majority owner, then we conclude that this account holder is already in control of what happens with these installations in relation to the EU ETS, so that we have found the ultimate corporate parent. If we can find a company that holds a majority, that owns a majority of this particular holder, then we repeat this exercise at the next level. So again, we check if there is another company that owns a majority. No, we found the corporate parent. Yes, we continue. And this is how we iterate up through the corporate levels until finally we establish a link between all these accounts in the EU ETS and the ultimate global parent companies. Now, in terms of the concrete outcomes, let me show you. We have a website which has some general introductory information about the project, some information about the wider consortium that is behind this project, about us, and then it has a download section. Okay? So the download section contains two things. The first thing is the actual matching. Now, let me show you as an example just the Italian part of it. I will sort and look for a nice example. Okay, so what we have done is we construct a combined ownership variable, which consists of ID numbers, BVD, Bureau van Dijk ID numbers. This is what they look like. And these ID numbers tell you which of these accounts, so these are individual installations, and here we have this different class of accounts. These are trading accounts. Which of them are controlled by the same corporation? You can then use these account numbers to link to Bureau van Dijk product, Amadeus or Orbis, and retrieve additional information about the companies. However, in case you do not have information, in case you do not have access to Bureau van Dijk product, or if you're not interested in additional information about these companies, then you can just stay at this level. And for that, then for your convenience, we have included the name of this historical global ultimate owner variable. So in this case, this is Enel, the Italian electricity generator. Then if you do not like the way we have constructed this variable, we have also provided disaggregated information for every of the 3 years. Okay? So there is additional information in a technical note that we have written. You will also find it on the website. And to give you a less heavy introduction, or if you're not as familiar with this issue, but you would like to become more familiar, there is a non-technical summary at the start of this document. And then you see all the detailed information in this, a list of variables, and so on. Okay, so now let me conclude with an outlook. So this project is conceived as part of a wider process of making more data available to researchers to encourage more empirical research on the EU ETS, on the firm level in particular, with the goal of understanding better how the EU ETS works and ultimately help inform European climate policy. So this is not supposed to be a static project. There's supposed to be updates or additions to this, both to the matching and to other aspects. For instance, recently, information on the association in terms of sector between installations and sectors has been published by the EU Commission. So we will be adding this information shortly. You will be able to go and download everything in one go. And it is also conceivable to update this matching to reflect more recent years, including the changing architecture of the EU ETS during phase 2. And finally, The website is also intended as a platform for other researcher-generated EU ETS related data. So if there is something that you would like to share with the wider community and you would like to use our website to do that, then please do get in touch and we will make sure we will try to accommodate you as much as we can. Now, thank you very much for your attention and I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you, Alex. Presentation was very clear and comprehensive, even though very technical on some aspects. In fact, we received many questions, and in the next 10 minutes, we will try to answer to some of them. I would start with this first one. What about those who trade permits but do not have an installation regulated under the EU ETS? Does your matching take them into account as well?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a question, if I understand correctly, about the two different classes of accounts that can be used in the EU ETS to trade. So for those of you maybe not familiar, let me rehash for a moment. So you have installations, so these are power plants, factories, and so on, that are regulated. So they are included in the EU ETS. If they are included, then they automatically have an account assigned to them. So if you're such an entity, you can use that account to trade. However, you may have some companies or private persons who have an interest in trading in the EU ETS, but they do not have a regulated entity. So they do not have an installation account as a result. In that case, they have to open a person holding account. So this is what, for instance, financial intermediaries have done. The person holding account is an account for which you have to do no compliance, in contrast to the installation accounts. You can use it purely for trading. The complication here is that some companies that have regulated accounts also have trading accounts. And they use them quite heavily, both to trade other firms' permits and also to optimize their own personal permit portfolio. So this is often the case with the great power generating companies. We have seen here, let me bring back this case of Enel. In fact, we have Enel that has a lot of installations here, and it has these two things that have no installation assigned to it. You can see there are no installation IDs, no permit IDs, no installation names, but it's an account. And it's a person holding account, as indicated by our data here. We have this dummy variable indicating whether some account is a person holding account, so this type of trading account, or a operator holding account, an installation account. So as you can see, our matching takes this situation, which is quite significant quantitatively, from what I have seen so far, explicitly into account.
Okay, thank you for this answer. And then I will go to another aspect of your project, which is in fact about the time period covered by it. We have a couple of questions on them. I will start with this, which is a bit more technical, because I think that maybe it will automatically answer to another one. So, in fact, a person is asking, could you observe changes in ownership of many installations? That is to say, an installation belonging to a company A in period 1 and a company B in the next period?
We do observe some of it. However, this brings me to a limitation of this matching, but also, unfortunately, to a limitation of all the matchings that I know of, is the fact, as you can see, can you see this slide?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so basically, what we do is we have to take the ownership situation of an installation at the current point in time. And for us, current means about last spring. So about, roughly speaking, almost 1 year ago, which is when we downloaded the list of these installations. The reason is that the installation holding information, so the ownership of each installation and of each, in terms of the holders, is updated very quickly by the EUTL. This is required by law. And they only have the most up-to-date version of the holding of the holder of each account online. So we do not observe if there was a difference between holders from, say, 2005 to 2006 to 2007 to 2008 to now. We have to assume that the company that is registered as the current holder was also the holder during phase 1. For which, so essentially what our project does is we take the current owner and we extract historical information, so we can track through time if the company that is registered as the holder was sold over time. For instance, it may have been sold from one corporation to another corporation in 2005 and to yet another in 2007. And we do observe some changes in that, we do. So it is important to track this. However, we are not able to track, unfortunately, with the information that we have publicly available, the changes in the actual holders that were registered for that particular account. So this is a caveat that you have to take into consideration. But even once we allow for that, we do see some changes in ownership, and you can see that from the spreadsheet here. So in this particular case, in NL, you don't have so much, but you see here, for instance, that there has been a change in ownership between 2005 and 2006, and it does occur for a number of companies.
Okay, that was clear. And so I will go to the second question regarding the period of your project. In fact, your project focuses on the data for 2005 until 2007, but what about more recent years?
Yes, that is an issue. However, we try to take this issue into consideration as much as possible. So what we did is, given the focus of the data right now, we are mainly concerned with matching for the period during which we have transactions, right? However, it is clear that people would like to use potentially more recent data on compliance, which includes new countries, new installations. It may include new sectors as well compared to phase 1. And so we took this into account by using the full list of installations as of April, I believe it was April 25 last year. So any installation that was opened at any point in time up to between the start of the EU ETS and April 25 last year is in the matching. So you're going to have a historical shareholder, a historical controlling company for each of these installations that we could match, even though it could be that that installation was not in the EU ETS at the time. So you're going to have an approximation to the situation today if you're willing to assume that the ownership situation since 2007 until the later period that you may be interested in has not changed dramatically, so that you can still use this matching. So we believe that this should be helpful. However, it is not specifically targeted for that more recent situation.
Okay, and now I would just pick the last question as we are running out of time. So basically, you mentioned that updates will be forthcoming, such as the one with sectoral data. An attendee asks if it is possible to sign up somewhere to keep up to date regarding these changes.
Yes, please. There is a plan to develop a bit where you can sign up directly on the website. However, in the meantime, if you would like to be kept up to date about additions and updates to the matching or other issues regarding this website, please do send me an email. The email is on the website, and I will make sure that you will be kept up to date about new developments in this.